Hello, everyone. My name is John Venezia. I lead ICF support to USAID on the CLEER tool. Was involved in building the tool many years ago and continue to be involved in updating it. I'm just going to spend a few minutes sort of, again, this is going to be a very high level, talking about the purpose of CLEER, really, introducing it to you and talking about how it can essentially help you and your implementers, if you're an operating unit, use it to more easily report on the greenhouse gas indicators. Next slide. So this is just a screenshot of the homepage of the tool. Again, the main reason we developed CLEER was to help the agency better understand and communicate the greenhouse gas impacts of clean energy programs. And sort of the primary goal of CLEER, the main sort of audience are the operating units and the implementers who are implementing those programs, much more easily report on the greenhouse gas indicators. Next slide. So that was essentially why we built CLEER. We wanted some sort of, and something very easy to use, online, easily accessible. It's actually publicly available, so there's no sort of firewalls to, for anyone to be able to go in there and to create projects and to use it. So we've had a number of other implementers outside the agency using it as well, which it's exciting to see. So essentially, this will help you estimate the greenhouse gas. Greenhouse gases reduced or avoided associated with most types of clean energy projects. A lot of renewable energy, energy efficiency, fuel switching. Also can sort of output sort of the energy impacts. It just needs, there's sort of, we've structured it so that it can accommodate multiple different sort of methodologies depending on the types of data you have on your projects. And again, it will, the focus is to sort of standardize things and to make it pretty easy to report out on your indicators. Next slide. So again, our main goal is just, to help sort of those in the field trying to do this. Just, a little bit of history, when USAID was first trying to report on the greenhouse gas indicators, there was just a lot of variance in reporting. Lots of operating units were under-reporting. A few were way over-reporting. Many were not reporting. And so, whether it was, confusion in what methodologies to use or emission factors to use, there really wasn't anything standard. And it was difficult, right? It was time consuming. And so, we really wanted to make reporting easier. And we really wanted something standard. So we wanted a standardized approach across the agency for estimating greenhouse gas impacts as a whole. And building on that, we really wanted to reduce the burden on you, the burden it takes to report, while at the same time actually increasing the confidence in the numbers being reported. So we started with sort of the guidance, and at the end I'll go through the different resources. You don't need to sort of access all these, but they're available to you. So we started with the CLEER protocol guidance, which has sort of all the methodologies, the real details if you're an energy geek like me and you want to sort of get into it. So we started with the guidance, but people want tools, and that's understandable. So we built a number of Excel tools, and then finally we were able to incorporate all those Excel tools into this online CLEER tool, which was very exciting, at least for us. Next slide. So I won't get into all this, but there's a lot of rigor built behind the tool. We wanted something very, user-friendly and easy to use, but also have a bunch of rigor behind it so that we can be confident in the accuracy of the estimates. You know, we built it best, you know, we built it on the best available guidance. You know, a lot of it is from IPCC, WRI's greenhouse gas protocol. You know, we regularly maintain and update the tool, you know, update the emission factors. We have, we applied for and achieved WRI's built on GHG protocol, which is a, you know, something they reserve for guidance and tools that conform with best practices of GHG accounting. And we also went through sort of a vetting process with some other donors. And so, you know, we're always trying to improve the tool, but, you know, I think, you know, there's a lot behind it. And again, sort of the main goal is to save you time. You know, you don't need to research emission factors. You don't need to research methodology. You don't need to, you know, create a spreadsheet and try to sort of do this on your own. Again, if you have sort of, you know, a complicated model and that's something that, you know, you're using, that can be sort of justified. You can also use CLEER, but then override emission factors. If you have, you know, if you want, if you know sort of a grid emission factor that you think is better than the default grid emission factor that we're providing in CLEER, you can override that, you know, with a little justification just to note sort of why you're overriding something. So it's just a little bit sort of the behind CLEER. Next slide. This is just a little bit of basics around greenhouse gas emissions calculations. You know, we know that you know, everyone on this webinar is not sort of an expert in these things. You know, it's so sort of just stepping back a little bit. You know, the main sort of goal of CLEER is to give you a tool to answer the question of what is the amount of greenhouse gases either being reduced or just being avoided for any sort of, you know, energy generated, you know, renewable energy generated, or, you know, fossil fuel energy being reduced. And we talk, you'll see sort of the symbol CO2e, that's CO2 equivalent. So that's sort of a combination of carbon dioxide that's, you know, again, being produced through an activity, plus methane, plus N2O, nitrous oxide. These are the three main greenhouse gases that are emitted from the combustion of fossil fuels. And so the greenhouse gas reductions, the outputs that we'll get, will be measured in CO2e, and they're due to sort of reduced or avoided fossil fuel use, at least sort of on the energy sector. For the most part, there's a couple other tools that go into a few other things, but most of it is due to avoided fossil use. So just for a very simplistic example, you know, if you're looking at, you know, how much carbon dioxide equivalent is avoided by just, you know, simply avoiding a kilowatt hour of electricity from a natural gas power plant, you'll need to know how many kilowatt hours, that's one, and then the emission factor for the natural gas power plant. We'll be talking about emission factors a number of times in this webinar. Just simple definition, it's just sort of the rate of which emissions are being released for a given activity. So the emission factor for a coal plant, for example, is higher than emission factor for an oil plant, higher than emission factor for a gas plant. You know, they're pretty sort of consistent by fuels, but you know, depending on sort of your grid electricity, it depends a lot on the mix of the grid, sort of in you know, the country that you're working with, or if you have even more localized data, that can be better. Next slide. So this is just sort of a general picture of, you know, what we mean by greenhouse gas emissions reduced. It's essentially a difference from sort of the baseline. So that sort of top of the bar there, that would be sort of your baseline emissions increasing. This is just an example project. And so, you know, we'll use the term baseline or business as usual as sort of what would have happened without the project. That sort of blue line there, that's the action. So, you know, the difference between sort of your business as usual and the action you're taking, that's the greenhouse gas emissions reduced. And actually, if you have a renewable energy project, we essentially make a kind of a simplistic assumption that emissions are zero, at least for most renewables, other than sort of the construction, but overall the lifetime emissions are zero. And so you'll essentially sort of only have those green bar for renewables. So just sort of going, down below, in order to look at the greenhouse gas emissions reduced, again, you're looking at baseline minus your action. And so for something like grid electricity, you'll want to know the amount of electricity that was generated, essentially by your renewable energy activity. You can assume that will offset the same amount of electricity from the grid, and then you'll need to multiply by grid emission factor. Again, we've tried to do a lot of the hard work for you. We have the grid emission factors in the tool, but again, you're also able to override them if there's something sort of standardized that you're using and you have good justification for it. Next slide. This is sort of a chart of emissions reduced by year, or I guess projected emissions reduced by year. Again, sort of the focus, there's a lot more focus on indicator 12-7, which is sort of the lifetime projected greenhouse gases reduced or avoided from projects. So we've recently updated the tool. I think it used to go to 2035. Now everything goes to 2050, which is more consistent with a lot of the reporting and sort of the focus. The year 2045, especially 2050, is getting a lot more focus. And some of these infrastructure projects do last a long time. So there's a couple different options for you to use the tool. You can do a custom projection, which is kind of more common, but if you have some details about how that forecast might change throughout the year, you can use a customized projection. You can download the data to Excel, and again, this chart just shows an example. You can get your outputs reductions every year. Those bars are just sort of these 5-year increments that you can tally up. Next slide. So this slide shows the 16 different technology types included in CLEER. Hopefully it covers the technologies that you are doing. If not, send something to the CLEER helpline. We're always interested in to see sort of what demand there is for additional tools. Sort of getting into the technology types a little bit, we know, from doing a lot of piloting with CLEER that users have different, very varying levels of data that you're able to collect on the program. Sometimes it can be very detailed. There's actual monitoring going on. Sometimes it's in the field, and you might only know sort of the size of the system or something like that. So, the different tools accommodate different sort of varying levels of data even within the tools. The three sort of ones in green would be the ones that, if you already know the amount of energy that is being generated or saved from your activity. So for example, the amount of electricity or the amount of fuel, it doesn't really matter, which technology is, you'll be putting sort of that technology in there, but it doesn't matter that much. You can just use one of those three sort of generalized tools highlighted in green: the general renewables, general energy efficiency, or fuel switching. So that's if you know the amount of energy that you're generating or saving. But if you don't know that, you might know the size of the system, but you don't, you're not sort of annually monitoring and getting that type of data. You can use one of the 13 sort of blue tools here. So you'll need some basic data, such as capacity installed, the location, or other sort of project details. And then you can use one of those tools. And again, those tools also accommodate varying levels of data. Again, we don't want you to get to like a question and then stop because you don't have the data. So it'll, we have a lot of sort of custom or default data in there to help you if you don't have it. And you can see there's sort of a wide range of activities in there. As long as you're able to have an estimate of the amount of technology being installed or deployed, then you can use these tools. whether it's auctions, transaction support, whether things are connected to the grid, not connected to the grid, different upgrades to technologies. Again, just sort of varying examples of different types of programs that this could be applicable to. Next slide. So this is just a couple screenshots of the tool. Katie will go into this when she does the demo. Again, it just requires some basic activity and technology information. Again, there's a lot of default data in the tool. So essentially the goal is sort of with minimal data entry, you can use the tool to calculate emissions. If you have better data, then you can get even a more accurate level of emission. So we wanted to accommodate those different levels. Next slide. So sort of on the left, we'll have the inputs. Those are the inputs that you'll need to collect. If you're an implementer, or again, this can also be done by the operating units, depending on sort of how you're sort of arranging your program. You'll need a sort of a variety of energy data. Fuel type displaced, fuel use, electricity use, location. Then when you sort of go into CLEER, again, we have a lot of the default factors, emission factors, capacity factors, a lot of factors specific to some of the different technologies. And so then once you sort of going through your calculations, you'll get your outputs. And again, sort of key is the outputs that you can use to do the reporting. What you need to report on an indicator 12-6, which is the annual greenhouse gases reduced, and indicator 12-7, which is the projected indicators reduced, or projected, sorry, greenhouse gases reduced. Next slide. So these are sort of just a high-level overview of the 4 steps. You'll need to create a project, which in sort of the USAID case is a contract or a program, and then create actions. There can be many different actions underneath that program. Actions also referred to clean energy activities. For each of those actions, you'll need to add input data. And then, again, you can use this tool to calculate the CO2 reduced or avoided. You can use the tool a couple different ways, again, sort of depending on how sort of the implementers and operating units decide to do this. The operating unit can do it, or the implementer can do it. Or there's sort of a collaboration feature. I'm not going to go into that. It's a little bit more complicated, but you can sort of join as a group and collaborate, so the implementer can do the calculations and then send the information over to the operating unit to review. Next slide. I think this is the last slide for me. We just have a variety of sort of resources available. Again, sort of that first link up there is a link to the CLEER tool. That's, Katie will be sort of going through that a bit right after I finish. There's some new guidance documents up there. There's a couple short videos, just a couple demos on how to use it. We still have the Excel calculators up there. We want to encourage everyone to use the online calculator, but if you're in the field and internet connectivity is bad, you can use the online calculators. The protocol contains all the methodologies, and then we also have a user guide and a helpline. So after this webinar, if you have questions for us that we haven't answered, you can reach us through the helpline. And all these resources available at the cleertool.org website. Next slide. Okay, well, that was it for me. Again, I hope that provided sort of a general sort of overview of CLEER, and I'll hand it over to Katie to do the demo part.
Great, thanks, John. All right, well, I will start by sharing my screen. I think just to make sure I can take over. All right. Hi, everyone. Thanks so much for attending. I'm Katie O'Malley. I am a Climate Change and Sustainability Manager with ICF. I've been working on CLEER for about 5 years, supporting CLEER users and tool updates. And I'm presenting to you all a demonstration to help you become a little bit more familiar with the CLEER tool. I'll demonstrate 2 short examples that will hopefully resemble projects where OUs should be reporting projected emissions used or avoided to make progress towards the climate change strategy. So one example, I'll show how CLEER can be used when you have clean energy electricity generation. And then in the other, I'll show an example of estimating emission reductions on CLEER only by knowing the capacity of a clean energy project. So to get started here, I'm on CLEER homepage. I will navigate to my dashboard. I'm already logged in, but this bar at the top is a helpful navigational feature. I'll start by creating a project. And this project, as John mentioned, this can be your contract name, your operating mission name. So I'll start by just calling this Renewable Energy Example Mission. And a lot of the data entry within CLEER, there's help text on the side just to give a little bit more information of what type of optional or required info is needed. I'll start entering a start date here with January 1st, 2020, and an end date, the end of 2025. Throughout CLEER, you can add additional descriptions, especially if you are collaborating with others. You can add owners and contributors, and some of that extra documentation throughout CLEER can be really useful. There's some additional reporting information again with some help text for more information about your project. So I'll save and review summary and navigate to the next page. In this first example, as I mentioned, we will be estimating the greenhouse gas emissions that will be projected from a collection of renewable energy projects in Tanzania. And these are a collection of multiple clean energy types. They all result in about 10,000 megawatt hours of new renewable electricity. So I'm navigated to the action page. So this action is an action or a clean energy initiative for the mission example here. I'll start by entering some of the action information. We can call this action renewable projection example. On this page, you add information about the technology type, region, geographic region. In this case, I'm going to be using the general renewable electricity technology type, since we know the 10,000 megawatt hours of new renewable electricity generated. As I mentioned, this is occurring in Tanzania, so our mission there. Again, more project partners and other descriptions can be added. All right, in addition, as John and Augusta were mentioning, you can estimate annual GHG emission reductions and projected emissions. In our case, we will be looking at the projected emission reductions for this renewable projection example. So I'm navigating to the next page, and below here, before it goes to the next page, you can see some data sources and elements, definitions as well of what you might need for this, for data entry here. So our the first year of this clean energy generation is 2025. So from this drop down, I'll select 2025. CLEER goes through 2030 for that first year of your projection. So starting in 2025, you have the option to enter default or select default data and navigate to the next page. Those who have changing impacts over time or a different cutoff date for the project that's before 2050 can select custom projection. In our case, we'll use some of the defaults, but we do have the option later to adjust some of those that are pre-populated in CLEER. So I'll go to the next page now. We will head to a second data input page, and this is where we'll enter some more of the specific information for our action. And as you'll see, some of the questions are or are not shown until I answer an earlier question. Just given that depending on what information I have, different questions will appear. So in our case, our renewable electricity is replacing electricity that would have been provided by the grid. In this case, I do know the amount of electricity generated. As I mentioned, that's 10,000 megawatt hours in that year. In our case, the system is connected to the grid, but there are options for other types of projects as well. So I'll navigate to the next page, and this is where we'll see the results. And we'll also have the opportunity to make adjustments to some of the default factors and review our inputs as well. So on this page, you can see in the green box here, the first year of the action, the tons of CO2e that have been avoided from this action. You'll see the energy generated and some of the default values that we can adjust here as well. Again, another opportunity to add some more assumptions or information just for documentation if you're collaborating, or just for future reference for your projects. So navigating back, or navigating next to another summary page, and this is where we'll see the projection through 2050. So from 2025 to 2050, we'll see the annual emissions that have been avoided from this action as well. So the top, you're shown a graph, and this is decreasing slightly, just given that technology degrading over time. Excuse me. And further down, you can see grouped by 5-year increments, projected GHG emissions reduced as well. At the very bottom, we see again some details from our projection, and can download those results to Excel for an annual breakdown and for further reporting or communication with team members. So now I can navigate back to the action page, either by selecting this button here to submit this information to your project owner, or you can just navigate back to your action, sort of save as a draft option as well. So that wraps up our first example where we had megawatt hours available to us. The next one I'll create for our same example mission.
So Katie, thanks for that. And just jumping in, we've had a few questions in the chat that I think might be helpful to just address now. So one was a quick one from Catalina. Do you recommend using a single project with many actions under the project, or could you just use multiple projects?
So it's up to you. I think it depends on the mission or the group. I think for a given action, so I'm still on our renewable projection here. For each individual year of data being reported, if you're selecting that type of reporting mechanism, you can enter in as many reporting years, but this will only be able to do one projection for an action. So
I think just sort of sorry, Katie, just stepping back, we used to have sort of the terminology USAID program for a project, but then we got a lot of comments from others that were outside of USAID that were trying to use the tool, and so we took out a lot of the USAID sort of specific terminology here. But a project essentially is a USAID program. So when you're looking at sort of a project, that'll be the program. And then when you're looking at your different sort of clean energy activities, each activity will be an action. So it's sort of project is your overall umbrella, and then the actions will be underneath that as each type of activity. You're doing a solar installation activity here, you're doing an auction here, you're doing, and some energy efficiency. So those will be sort of the individual actions. And then you'll add data for each action.
Yeah, if I might add, it probably doesn't matter at all if you're submitting data, you're monitoring data to USAID as a spreadsheet. But if they're asking you to use the approval function in the CLEER tool itself, then it's probably better to have it all in one project and it'll be organized that way. We might have new guidance on that in coming years, but right now I think it doesn't matter. There was a question on calculating a baseline when it comes to solar water pumping. I don't know, Katie, maybe you could just take a couple minutes to talk through how might you consider the case of installing a bunch of solar water pumps? Like, where would you start in terms of getting the input data needed for the CLEER calculation?
Sure, and definitely I'm inviting some colleagues to help chime in, and since I think there was some initial responses too. Sorry, John, did you?
I mean, I can jump in if you want, because I was trying to monitor the chat.
Sure.
So yeah, so I mean, I think, you know, for a lot of these projects, if it's replacing something that already existed, then you can essentially use, you know, if you're able to sort of collect information or make some assumptions about, you know, the old water pumps required, you know, X amount of energy per year, you know, electricity, or if they were actually, you know, powered by diesel or something like that, you can say, you know, those fuels will no longer be used, and it's going to be solar, and so you can use that as sort of what's replaced. If they're new, you know, you would make the assumption that it would have been met by sort of, you know, fossil powered pumps, and so you'll just need to make some assumptions. We have some assumptions in there about, okay, if you have a certain amount of you know, megawatts or kilowatts, you know, how big your system is, how many days a year it's operational, the capacity factor. We have a number of those assumptions in CLEER, but you will need to make some assumptions about the usage.
And I think hopefully that answers, Mohammed, your question as well about the previous source of energy that's being replaced. I think our default typically is grid electricity would replace that demand for power. But I think that's also specific to the project, and hopefully, if you know if your project would not have been, or action wouldn't have been implemented, likely the grid would have been able to supply, or a generator, or a specific fuel type as well.
So just a couple quick questions, and then we'll let Katie go on to another demo. There was a question about the AFLU tool, which is for calculating land use, emissions from land use. I personally don't know anything about how that tool works, but it exists. It's still, my understanding is it's still being used for the land use stuff. So if anybody's interested in that, feel free to send me an email and I can connect you to the right folks on our end that could maybe answer questions about that. Gerardo, you asked about black carbon or PM 2.5 or other air pollution sorts of indicators, and it can that be calculated by a CLEER? The answer is I don't think it's not yet, but we're in active discussions about if we could add that in. And so when you go ahead, yeah, so I see Jess Lewis already replied to you. Chat with us about, I would love to connect with you on that, because we would like to support in that calculation, even though it's not officially part of the tool. And also we can, you know, we're actively thinking about how we might augment the tool for that. Okay, Katie, I'll stop interrupting you there and let you go on to your next plan thing.
Sure, no worries, and it's really great to see so many questions. Definitely feel free to drop them in. All right, well, I will now navigate back to the project, the overall mission, centralized location for all types of mission activities. Again, you can create new projects for other activities as well under the same mission. There's not really required structure for how to use CLEER, but in our case, this one mission will use multiple actions housed under this one project. So I'm back on my back on the project page. The bottom over here, you'll be able to see the projected reductions from our first action. So everything gets kind of aggregated here as well. So another reason to possibly house all of those actions together. So our next action, I'll select add action here. And in this case, as I mentioned, this next action is a solar energy project, but we only know the capacity. It hasn't been built yet, so we're not exactly sure how much electricity it'll generate in a given year. So I'll start by entering a name here. I'll call it solar installation example. This action is taking place in Kenya. So I'll select solar photovoltaic system. entering in the geographic details here. And again, I'll select projected GHG emission reductions as our goal. So navigating to our next page, this project starts a little earlier. 2023 is going to be the first year. And again, we'll select default projection. 2023 is the first year, and default again. So navigating to this next data input page, a lot of this seems very similar to the previous technology we used as well. In this case, again, the energy that is being replaced is grid electricity here. This action will be replaced by electricity from the grid. We, in this case, do not know the amount of electricity generated, so I'll select no. So a different set of questions appear here. In our case, generation capacity is 100 megawatts, so entering the units as well. System does not have a tracking mount. Here's an instance where we can use a country average capacity factor or a site-specific capacity factor. In our case, we'll use the average for the country. And in this case, our solar installation is a distributed system. So in this case, there will be some additional savings from line loss. So I'll now navigate to the next page for our microgrid system. We'll be able to see the single year's emissions avoided, all of our inputs again, have the opportunity to adjust some factors. So here's where CLEER has some of those built-in factors that we can have the opportunity to change. Maybe the system isn't operational 365 days a year. Maybe we anticipate higher utilization of the system. All of those can be entered here and recalculated, which gives for greater flexibility for when some of those default factors, when there's more information available. So finally, I will now review the summary of our results. We'll see the graph again, have the opportunity to download data to Excel, and communicate those results. So we can see here, here each annual year's emissions avoided based on this system. And again, our inputs and the ability to download the data as well. So I'll submit the information for approval and navigate back to that actions homepage. So that pretty much concludes this part of the demonstration. I'll quickly show the support and resources page as well and head back to the slides, but I wanted to show again the projected reductions here of GHG emissions. Again, definitely let us know if you have any questions in the chat. Otherwise, maybe in a new tab, I'll open up our support and resources page here quickly just to show all of our user guides. This is some of what John alluded to earlier, fact sheets, protocols, and our Excel calculators as well. Some default data sources just for further information about CLEER's assumptions. And if you have any questions or comments, please feel free to reach out to the helpline, clearhelp@icf.com. Any final questions? Otherwise, I can jump back to our CLEER webinar, our Q&A slide. Okay.
Hi, can I ask a quick question? Mohammed here. When you were talking about the source being replaced is grid electricity, you know, I'm just going to give you an example here in Pakistan. You know, the grid electricity currently, for example, comes from multiple sources. And then we have a hydropower project, which is a renewable energy project, which will, you know, which is being funded, for example, by USAID funds. And that will also contribute an electricity to the grid. So how do you differentiate as to, you know, what was previously before in the grid electricity, which could come from multiple sources, like it could be from fossil, you know, from fuel fired plants, or it could be from renewable. So that distinction, I'm just trying to think how are you going to get this benefit of reducing the GHG by the new renewable energy project in that scenario? I don't know if I made this clear to you.
Yeah, I mean, I can take a quick shot at it, Katie, if that's okay. So yeah, so basically, as far as default factors that CLEER has in the tool, at least for electricity, they're sort of combined. I won't get into this too much because it's a little technical, but they're marginal emission factors. They take into account sort of the build margin, essentially what's being built recently on the grid, as well as the operating margin, so sort of what's being dispatched. So it's a combination of those two. And then you can see what the combined margin factor we have, example for Pakistan. So it's country specific. So depending on the country you work in, your factors will be different. And then you can take a look at that factor and say, yes, this makes sense. Or if you have better information, for example, if there's they would have, if USAID hasn't come, they would have built this coal power plant. Instead, they're building, the hydro plant. Then you can assume, no, I'm not going to assume the average grid factor. I'm going to assume what would have happened without the intervention was coal. So you would use a higher emission factor, so, something around 900 or so for the coal plant rather than the average grid factor. So it depends on the assumptions, but we do have sort of the average factors by country in there. That helps.
So we have a question from Ufros. I hope I said that right. And then we'll go to Mackenzie, who has their hand raised, and then we'll go to a couple of the others in the chat. So first asked, is there a way the CLEER system monitors double counting? That's a great question. And unfortunately, no, that's something you have to do outside of CLEER. It's possible that there can be support. So in the collaboration function that was described, if the USAID COR sets up a project and then everybody is contributing actions against that project, then they might be able to see what could be contributing. But for instance, if one implementer supports the regulations around an auction and another implementer supports the auction platform, and then both implementers try to claim the auction, that would be double counting, and CLEER doesn't help with that. So let me go over to Mackenzie with the hand raised.
Hi, thanks for the webinar. It's Mackenzie with the Water and Energy for Food Grain Challenge. And thanks for putting together this tool. We use it constantly, so I really appreciate it. I also appreciate the flexibility in terms of what data you have available and what you can enter, but I do have a question about what the general guidance is when you get different results depending on those entries. So I'll give a couple examples. One being when you're, say, under the technology type general energy efficiency, you're working with electricity from a generator and you have the option enter the fuel pre and post for the generator versus the electricity pre and post. I've done it both ways just to kind of check my math and seeing that I get different results, which makes sense, right? Because it's different data being entered. But what's the general guidance about what to do there? Is it to take the average? Is it one or the other is more reliable? What should the general approach be?
Yeah, and I think there's no specific. I mean, that's great. I think that's great that you're doing two different ways to sort of double check, your work. I wouldn't expect sort of two exact numbers, but hopefully they're sort of in the general ballpark. I think if you have pretty good data on what was used before, and essentially what you're installing is offsetting or displacing what was used before, I would probably default to that rather than sort of the other methodology, but either is fine. So you could use an average, or you might use sort of what was used before, because that was in fact being used before, unless you're the demand is increasing, and then you'll want to have something showing that for each year you'll get more benefits as the years go on.
Yeah, more just a question about whether entering the fuel versus entering the energy output is more reliable when it comes to calculating the impact of a generator electricity.
Yeah, again, I mean, I think if you know the amount of fuel, that's a pretty good, you know, I mean, each fuel has its own sort of carbon content. So if you know the amount of fuel being displaced and the type of fuel, then that will give you probably your best estimate.
Okay, perfect. Thanks.
So I'm going to hit a couple other questions here. Before I do that, let me just make a plug. I have dropped a link to an evaluation in the chat. What we really want to hear from you there is, do you need additional help with anything or want additional information on CLEER? So if you'd please fill that out, that would be really great. Quickly, Randall asked a question about what assumptions are being made with inverter capacity relative to max PV. And is this calculated in the CLEER tool? After that, I'm going to hit the ESP question and then go to you, Catalina, with your hand raised.
Hi, this is because I can take the inverter question. I'm with ICF. The D-rate factor is already built in as a factor in the CLEER tool. So if you want to use the capacity data to estimate your baselines, then we would provide the DC to AC conversion D-rate factors already in the system. So you just need to worry about the DC megawatt inputs.
Great, thank you. So moving on to the question from the project in Philippines, Chris. You have written that you have an intervention intended to enhance the logistics for the delivery of essential goods. So a transport related situation where you're deploying trucks run by batteries charged through solar that will be displacing diesel. Is there a module in CLEER that works on this?
So we don't have a transport specific module. Again, this is sort of an area where, you know, if there are more transportation projects that, you know, are being done and that's a demand, I would love for you guys to sort of reach out. But I think there are probably some general assumptions that you can use, you know, if you're able to, and I'll be the first to say that, you know, CLEER cannot answer all questions. So you definitely may have to have something separate to estimate the amount of, you know, diesel that would have been used. And then you can use, you know, what you can take that, and once you have sort of the amount of fuel and the type of fuel, then you can put it in CLEER to get your CO2 emissions. But you might have to do some sort of back end analysis to get to the amount of fuel displaced.
And there is a fuel switching technology within CLEER. So depending on the data you have, fuel switching within CLEER could be a good technology option for that project.
So we're right up against the hour. Thank you for everybody joining. We're gonna stay on for another couple minutes and hit Catalina's question. And if anybody wants to hang out with us, I understand that most people will probably drop off. Please do the evaluation. And thank you for joining, those of you who have come. Catalina, the floor is yours.
Thank you. And thank you for the presentation. It's a very interesting tool. And I wanted to ask you if we can use it for non-specific energy projects. And what I mean is sometimes as part of sustainable agriculture projects, we install solar panels or mini grids, but very, very small projects or actions. Can we apply it and use it for very small interventions?
Yep. Yeah, definitely. So, you know, you could use the solar module. You know, I mean, if you're not actively, if you don't know how many sort of, you know, kilowatt or megawatt hours of electricity you're getting, you could just use sort of the size of the system, even if it's small. You know, sort of your location. Actually, location, I think Katie mentioned, you know, sort of the country average. But you can actually use like your grid coordinates. There's in the back of the solar calculator, there's you know, sort of a global grid coordinates that looks at solar insolation, basically how much solar is sort of hitting at every point on the grid. And so you can if you know your sort of your coordinates, you can input your coordinates and the size of your system, and that'll get you the amount of electricity, and then it'll there'll be a assumed you can either put in what fuel would have been used, or you can just use sort of assume it was grid.
Thank you. It's very useful.
Okay. Thanks, everyone. I think we have hit pretty much everybody's questions at this point, and we're just only 1 minute over. So let me just wrap us up there. Say thank you to everybody for coming. Remind everybody that the presentation has been shared in the calendar invite. You can have the links to the resources there, and we'll be sharing the recording at a future date. Thanks for coming. Remember, you can also always email me or the CLEER help desk with additional information. And please complete the survey. Thanks, everyone.